Con number 2. Oil is not a fossil fuel. It is renewable. The immigration officer at Sheremetyevo took my passport and studied it for some time. He didn't say anything. He just thumbed through the passport and then looked at a computer screen for a couple of lifetimes before stamping it and getting me onto customs. The KGB was still manning the borders the first time I went to Moscow shortly after the fall of communism. Letting Americans walk freely into Mother Russia without official surveillance was driving the man crazy, but he had to keep a lid on it. In fact, communism had been officially dead for only a few months when the shock troops of capitalism started storming the gates of opportunity in the former Soviet Union. The ghosts of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin stalked the halls of the Politburo. I can't say this stuff. In horror, as entrepreneurs from the United States, Japan, and Western Europe tried to cut deals for every asset in Mother Russia that wasn't nailed down. Banking, hospitality, timber, and precious metals came under assault by peculiar partnerships of Western capitalists and thugs from the once mighty KGB. During those early years when Yeltsin and his vodka were in office, it was a free-for-all. The Oklahoma land rush of the 1890s had nothing on Moscow in 1992. But even then, the oil industry stayed under control of the state, directly or indirectly. In fact, as recently as 2003, the bare-chested former KGB colonel and current premier, soon-to-be president of Russia, again, Vladimir Putin, squashed a buyout deal between Russia's Yukos and Exxon, the largest company in the world. To understand the reason for this, we return momentarily to the early days of the Cold War, when an isolated Soviet Union tasked their top scientists to identify the actual source of oil, not a weekend homework assignment. After considerable research, in 1956, Russian scientist Professor Vladimir Porfiryev announced that crude oil and natural petroleum gas have no intrinsic connection with biological matter originating near the surface of the earth. They are primordial, meaning originating with the earth's formation, materials which have been erupted from great depths. He said, oil doesn't come from anything biologic, not, as conventional wisdom dictates, from the fossilized remains of dinosaurs and or ancient plant matter. It comes from very deep in the earth and is created by a biochemical reaction that subjects hydrocarbons, elements having carbon and hydrogen, to extreme heat and intense pressure during the Earth's formation. Russians refer to this oil, any oil really, as abiotic oil, because it is not created from the decomposition of biological life forms, but rather from the chemical process continually occurring inside the Earth. I know, easy for Porfiryev to say, but it turns out it was more than just a theory. Because shortly after the Russians discovered this, they started drilling ultra-deep wells and finding oil at 30,000 and 40,000 feet below the Earth's surface. These are staggering depths, and far below the depth at which organic matter can be found, which is 18,000 feet. Interesting, huh? The Russians applied their theory of abiotic deep drilling technology to the Dnieper-Donetsk basin, an area understood for the previous half a century to be barren of oil. Of 60 wells drilled there using abiotic technology, 37 became commercially productive, and a 62% success rate compared with the roughly 10% success rate of the U.S. wildcat driller. The oil found in the basin rivaled Alaska's North Slope. Let's say they had a good hair day. But it doesn't stop there, not by a long shot. Since their earlier discoveries, the major Russian oil companies have quietly drilled more than 310 ultra-deep wells and put them into production. Result? Russia recently overtook Saudi Arabia as the Earth's largest oil producer. Maybe they are onto something. Though there were papers written on this early on, almost all were in Russian and few made it to the West, and those that did were laughed at. No more. With Russia's rejection of the Exxon Yukos deal, Putin did not want this technology and their abiotic oil experts exported to the West, and the access to information now available on the internet, the word has begun to spread rapidly to the West. Still, it hasn't taken hold yet. Why not? This is huge. Oil is not a fossil fuel, and it's renewable. Wow. There are a couple of factors at play here. Big oil has a vested interest in pushing the idea that oil is scarce, hard to find, and thus costly to produce, all of which, of course, means increased revenues and profits. This is a story in itself, but not the primary focus here. More relevant to our story is the fact that a cornerstone of the environmental movement is this. Oil is a fossil fuel that is scarce and is in limited and ever-decreasing supply. Moreover, its production creates carbon dioxide. Therefore, its use for virtually all productive purposes, agriculture production, real estate construction, auto, truck, train, and air transportation, utilities, heating, cooling, communication, ad infinitum, all of them must be curtailed. According to the 30-year update of the book, The Limits to Growth, quote, a prime example of a non-renewable resource is fossil fuels, whose limits should be obvious, although many people, including distinguished economists, are in denial over the elementary fact. More than 80% of year 2000 commercial energy use comes from non-renewable fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, and coal. The underground stocks of fossil fuels are going continuously and inexorably down. Peak gas production will certainly occur in the next 50 years. The peak for oil production will occur much sooner, probably within the decade. End quote. Scary stuff. Frightening. But as false as a hooker's smile. Oil is not a fossil fuel. And it is renewable. While I have never been a fan of Putin, the macho, the Russians have demonstrated the accuracy of their theory in the only place it counts, the oil field. Oil is not only abiotic, it continues to populate fields that were understood to be as dry of petroleum as a desert wind. In fact, some scientists believe it is the centrifugal force of the planet's rotation that forces abiotic oil to the planet's surface on a continuous basis. Stupid. This is a quote from the late Katharine Graham, owner of the Washington Post. There are some things the general public does not need to know and shouldn't. I believe democracy flourishes when the government can take legitimate steps to keep its secrets, and when the press can decide whether to print what it knows. So con number 2 is that oil is a fossil fuel, which it isn't, that it is scarce and being depleted, which it isn't, that it is non-renewable, which it isn't, and that, as a result, catastrophe looms, which it doesn't, unless we drastically curtail our use of petroleum.